Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever and whenever you are tuning in from. This is Keith Couch with Rush Peterbilt, Rocky Mountain Peterbilt's on YouTube, and I have Ryan Byers here with Front Range Compliance and DOT University. How are you today, Ryan?
I am doing good. I'm just excited to be recording another episode of Truck Around and Find Out, Keith. It's been a fun time. Lots going on, and that type of thing. So, yeah.
So today's topic is something that I don't know anything about. We were talking about transmissions and automatic and automated on the last one, and this one, you're going to have to kind of tell me, this is kind of your world.
Well, this is my world, definitely. And it's a topic that I hold very near and dear to my heart. There's kind of going back, tell a little story that kind of goes with this. I was asked to come in and do some training with this company one time. It was a company based out of here in Weld County. Not naming any names, but it's been long enough ago. But it's just one of those moments that stood out to me. They wanted me to come in and do some training with their drivers. We had a meeting, about 40 drivers present, and before I got there, they had their little safety manager there, and he wanted to talk to him before me, which is totally cool. I've got my topic. I know what I'm going to be training about, and we're all set to go. But I also knew all about this company because we were going to be helping them with DOT programs and getting their stuff squared away and that kind of thing. And, so I'm very focused, like, hey, this is what we got to train on. And the safety manager, he does his little spiel. He talks about stuff. And literally he says, today we're going to have our safety meeting. And today's topic is going to be, and he literally, as he's saying the big long as he's thinking of a topic, because he was totally unprepared, he kind of stares up at the sky like waiting for something to fall on him, and I'm just kind of listening. I'm kind of watching him. He says, and today we're going to talk about following too closely, and then he gave a quick little spiel on what his following too closely was. And I'm kind of sitting in the back, and I'm thinking about their whole program, and knowing all the stuff that they've had go wrong. I was like, good topic. Following too closely is all about giving yourself time to react and avoiding crashes so that you have time to stop that truck or maneuver it, whatever it's going to be. But that's not the problem that this company is having. They didn't have any crashes, anything like that. And I'm thinking of all the probably 100 other things that they've got going on. And I was just thinking to myself, there's a better way to come up with your topics that you should talk about to make it pertinent directly to the situation. So what I did is, we were talking about, this podcast, put it together. What I did was I went and I pulled some examples. So utilizing the data that's there, like you have this really great tool that the FMCSA puts out. It's called the Safety Measurement System. And the easiest way to go through and access at first is go to Safer. If you don't have access to your portal, which in today's day and age, if you've got a DOT number, you've got to have the portal, because that's where you're going to get and access your system and everything else. But a lot of this is public. So the information, the examples that I pulled out for Keith and I today, I just went to Safer. I randomly selected 3 companies, and we're not going to name who they are. I just kind of went through companies that I know, and I just pulled up 3 different, and all 3 of them are just a little bit different, which is kind of unique today. So
Yeah, and I saw how you did this. It's just common sense. But like you said, the way you did it, and I'll let you explain how you did it, but it's like, wow, if they just address those.
The slightest little touch, just a little bit
it's amazing.
Just something that you're paying attention to. But so what I did was, I went to the SMS, and if you want that website, you can go to Google and you can type in FMCSA Safer. You can even just type in Safer, SAFER, and that'll take you to the public view if you just want to access this, of course, from the public side. If you're accessing it through your portal, that's even better for your company. You're just not going to be able to see what other companies are doing. But like I said, I want to stress, all this information is public. I did not log into anybody's account, and I can see all the violations. And somebody that has knowledge similar to mine, they can pretty much dissect this information and say in a real quick instance, hey, this is the problems that this particular company has. So the purpose of this is when you go to Safer, you pull up your snapshot, or if you go to ANI online and look at safety measurement, the SMS, you go down and you look at one of your 7 basics. Today, I just pulled up vehicle maintenance categories, just for the example. If we were going to look at this as a broader scheme, we can look at any of the basics basics would include driver violations, unsafe driving actions, and all those different things. But just for the point of discussion today, I kept it 100% just a vehicle maintenance basics. So what is happening through your level 1, level 2 roadside inspections, and what kind of violations do you have? And I pulled out 3 examples. Now, what I'm looking for, Keith, on this is violation trends, because this
Mm-hmm.
is what you got to straighten up. If you're going to truly fix your safety rating, this is something that you 100% absolutely have got to focus on. So you want to go through first and identify what's a trend. So do you know what a trend is yet?
Yeah.
So when for
Yep.
everybody listening, a trend is going to be when you have the same type of violation that has occurred more than 2 times. What that does is that starts, as soon as you get a reoccurring violation, that really starts to score heavier within the FMCSA, and it's going to jump you. So in this number, in the SMS, you as a company, you are scored against 99 other companies. And that number, we don't know who your companies are. It's all top secret. You're put in the pool. You're not compared as a nation against all the companies. In SMS, you're 100% looked at with the 99 other companies that are in there with you, and how are you doing in comparison. So your overall scoring. When you get to a certain threshold where you start to have these trends and you start to rank in there, it's a lot like a game of golf. You want to have a lower score. The higher the score, the more probability of an audit. And when you go over a threshold, you're an intervention. And the intervention with the FMCSA is not one of those situations where, it's like, hey, the feds are going to come and your friends are going to come and they're going to sit down next to you and say, hey, we think you have a problem. What happens when you're in intervention is instantly you start getting letters from the FMCSA saying, hey, we've recognized you have a problem. This is what you got to do to fix it. And they expect you to heed their warnings. The longer you're in intervention, the higher probability that you're going to have an audit. And then an audit can result in penalties. It can result in downtime, a lot of money spent, the wasted time sitting in an audit. Some of these auditors come in and sit in your office for 2 or 3 days. Well, that takes all your staff and the focus away from the work. So what we got to do is get on top of this, and we got to figure out what it is we got to fix this. So Keith saw me do this real quick. I basically took this and each of these examples where I pulled all the violations that these companies have had, and I just identified what trends do they have. Now, let me just emphasize this one more time for you, Keith. When I say a trend, if you look at the regulations, part 393, that regulation is all the parts and accessories that's necessary for safe operation. Now, individually in that section, it's broken into subparts. So when you go through and you look at all the rules, for instance, lights are all in their one little subpart, brakes are all in their own little subpart, cargo securement. So when we talk about trends, I'm not saying that you have overall 3 different types of equipment violations. The trend is I've got 3 violations in lights or brakes or cargo securement
Got
or
it.
emergency equipment, you name it, each one of those little subparts. So that's the first thing is I'm breaking it down, saying where are our trends at? So just real quick, in less than 5 minutes, I think it was probably 2 or 3 minutes, I looked through all 3 of these little examples, highlighted and identified what the trends are. So in this first example, I've got this particular company, a smaller company, probably between 8 and 10 trucks, and I just pulled up their violations that they do have. And of these violations, what we saw was a quick trend that was identified and then a possible trend. So of the total violations, the very first trend, just at a glance, was we had some cargo securement issues. So we had 2 violations that were also out of service violations for heavy vehicles or equipment, improper securement. Okay. And the second one we saw was just loose or unfastened tie downs. They had another write up for that. And then they had another heavy vehicle securement, again, for machinery that was either on crawlers, wheels, or tracks, improper securement. So a total, we had 5 violations of cargo securement there. So I think there's actually 4, looking at the math here. So we have 4 violations of cargo securement. And then I was like, okay, do they have any pending potential other violations? They had 2 brake violations. So we're up to 2, meaning if we get any more, we're going to be back to a violation trend. So that would be a second trend causing that score to elevate. So looking at these numbers, if I were just going to walk into a group of individuals and say, okay, today we're going to train plane. I'm not going to stare at the sky and go, let's talk about falling too closely. Today, it's real clear what we've got to train on, and that's going to be some cargo securement. And drivers are thirsty for that training. I mean, when you go through and you spend a couple hours talking to a team and tell them exactly how they're supposed to do these cargo securement, how they're supposed to total up their chains, making sure that chains are undamaged, making sure they know what the weakest link is, it's such a great topic, and it's going to eliminate these recurring violations, so we already have 4 of those. So pick your trends, look at the violations that you're having. What are you struggling with the most? And then we'll kind of peer from there. You eliminate these trends, the actual trend of cargo securement, and then you get on top of this brakes or stop it so we don't get any more braking violations. We've got a trend. We've got a violation for some tinting that got put, it looks like on the windows that was too heavy. Okay. We've got a single tire violation. We had a washer blade that was bad, and we had 1 lighting violation. So all 3 of those are normal violations, but eliminate the rest. Man, this safety profile is going to be really
you eliminate more than half.
More than half.
Quickly.
Yeah, very, very quickly. So that was company number 1. So I just, again, look, using SAFER, going into your violations, using that SMS to your benefit, figure out what you need to train on to focus on that. Now, in the second example that I pulled up, Keith, they got a little bit more violations spread across. They had a total of, I didn't do the count on there, but they had a total of 9 vehicle inspections. And just real quick at a glance,
looks like air brakes.
Yeah, it's going to be air brakes. You just kind of go down through that, and you've got brakes with tubing and inadequacy there. You've got an air brake violation. This one was improper splice. We have air leaks. We have brake connections with leaks. We have a brake adjustment, and we have the air brake failed an air loss rate test. So just, again, all in the same parts and subparts. So not all 393, but those are all in the brake. So we have those reoccurring violations. And, one other thing to consider is 4 of those in that trend are all also out of service violations. So with this one, we would say, okay, this company particularly, they really need to focus on some brake training. Now, this one's a little bit more tricky because it's going to involve a lot more people, not just your drivers. So
right.
When it comes to drivers, like, you remember the old school drivers, okay? So it was back in 1994, the new rule came out. The feds said, no more manual adjusters. We got to have, everything's got to be auto adjusters, right? So from 1994 to probably 2015, and that's some time in there, we just saw that drivers just didn't know how to deal. Techs just didn't know how to deal with the automatic adjusters. Same old thing. And it hasn't improved. Sadly, it hasn't improved that much. It's getting a little bit better, but I still come across tons of technicians that don't know how to drive. But the point of that I'm getting at is, prior to 1994, if a truck driver got pulled over, one of the first things they were going to show you is, I got my wrench and I got my brake adjustment card. They're qualified to do that brake adjustment. They got training. Today's day and age, when I go and talk to drivers and I say, hey, you need to look at your brakes, when I even remotely suggest that you need to crawl underneath your truck and look at your brakes to make sure they're good, I get, oh, no, we don't go under the trucks. That's unsafe. So we've kind of come across that. So we've kind of, drivers have just slowly gotten away from that, to the point where drivers today are like, no, I don't even need to go under the trucks. And I wish it was a set it and forget it, which it definitely is not. So a couple things, like, if I was going to say, hey, you look at your trends and you say, we've got brake problems. Well, first off, you need to train your drivers on how to properly look at their brakes. It doesn't matter if you got air brakes or electric brakes or hydraulic. They need to understand what they have and what they're looking for. Probably the 2 biggest systems that we see the problems is always air brake systems. Maybe they're going out of adjustment. We're not servicing them correctly, that type of thing. But when it comes to trailer brakes for electric, we're dealing with that pesky electric brake. Drivers don't know properly how to set that hand control module to make sure that they're getting the proper braking forces. Or the number 1 violation against your trailer electric brakes is breakaway brake devices is inoperable, or it's hooked up wrong, or, the cable's damaged, whatever. But definitely want to do some training with that. And the last thing I'll say when it comes to the brakes is, you got to stop the adjustment. No more brake adjustments. These are automatic brake adjusters for a reason. So
what about disc brakes?
well, disc brakes are phenomenal, man, and we could probably have you
So
do a whole session
what
on
I'm
on
hearing
that.
from a lot of my customers, they're speccing disc brakes. Disc brakes have come way down in price. They're very economical
Yeah.
anymore. They're not a big option cost.
Mm-hmm.
But they're saying when they go through a DOT inspection or a roadside, whatever, they just wave them through when they see it's disc brakes.
Yeah, I'd say that's happening too. Um, Look, the disc brake is a great braking system. It's more efficient. It cools. You don't have to adjust it. It might have your disc brakes will typically still have that brake can, that drum on there. Where it's got the cam, but it's all enclosed. So the cam is basically just driving the wedge, or not. The wedge is the wrong
squeezing
term,
it.
but it's basically making that caliper, of course, squeeze that rotor. So nothing's exposed. So there's never a brake adjustment. You're just checking to make sure, number one, that you got proper linings, checking to make sure that the rotor is in good condition, and that type of thing.
It's all be done very easily.
Yeah, it's so much more and way more efficient and a lot less brake violations. So yes, the disc brakes a great
Less
thing
brake
to have.
fade too,
So
especially when you're dealing with the mountains.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's a great system. But no matter what, until we, especially with the trailer turnover, or the trailer interchanges, stuff like that, we're still going to be running the old school brake drums and the air chambers.
Well, I think it was in 2014, most manufacturers, at least I can speak for Peterbilt, had to go to disc brakes on the steer axle to meet the new FMCSA braking distance.
Yeah.
So drum brakes didn't cut it anymore on the steer axle, so they were forcing us to go to discs on the steer.
It makes sense. If memory serves, it's like 60% of your braking efficiency comes off of that steering axle brake, which is a whole funny topic on itself, because remember, before 1980, you didn't have to have steering axle brakes, because they believed that if they went into a skid, they could steer through it. And then they started doing skid testing and realized actually we're jackknifing more often, so we shouldn't do that. So, yeah, definitely. That was a good call first. Let's put brakes on the front of the trucks. I think it's a great call, disc brakes on the front, more and more. But when we're dealing with these drum brake systems with the manual adjustment, I mean, as when your driver takes a vehicle, so we were out, we did some mock inspections. That's where we kind of go out, and there's the trucks before they leave, they go through one of our quick inspections. It's a lot better to find out what us at Front Range Compliance thinks of your truck than an actual DOT guy. Like, we're not going to affect your safety rating, but we're going to help you be safer out on the side of the road. When an officer finds the same things, you're taking a ding for 2 years, it's going to affect you, and it's your violations are going to end up on the scorecard that we're looking at today for these three examples. But this one particular time, we had a truck show up, and 50% of his brakes were out of adjustment. So we told the driver, hey, look, you're going to have to go back to the shop, have the guy, the mechanics, get your truck fixed. So it was 10 minutes later, he's back in my line, and I knew what happened. I says, oh, so you got the brake fixed already? And he says, yep, they did the brake adjustment. And I said, really? I said, well, we're going to check them again. So I said, just you give us a minute. We're going to get to you. He was not happy with us, but he was actually happy by the time we got finished up, because by the time we crawled underneath his truck and went back underneath to do the inspection, the brakes, all 50% of them, were right back out of adjustment. So when I say stop the adjustment, that's what I'm talking about. If you've got a brake that has gone out of adjustment, when you put the wrench on there and you manually adjust an automatic brake, it only takes 10 brake presses before that brake ratchets right back out where it was at. You do not manually adjust an automatic brake unless it's to set it for the first time after you've made a repair or installation, whatever that is. But any adjustment after that, you as a driver are literally going to think, hey, we're ready to roll. This truck's got good brakes on it. But I mean, think about it. How many times do you press the brake before you even get out of the yard? I mean, did you press it 10 times before you even hit the street? And the brakes are right back out where they were at. So it gives you that false tense. Then you get pulled over, and you're going to be taking these brake violations, or worst case scenario, you're going to end up in a crash because you don't have efficient braking on that truck. And its brakes are just absolutely incredible. So with that being said, like with this company here, I would work with drivers on pre-trip, proper checking their brakes, making sure they're good, but better yet, working with the technicians so they know how to deal with these brakes. We have to, when it comes to these automatic brake adjusters, you absolutely have to make the repair. Any of the worn components that got to be removed and replaced, and then set that brake, and then make sure that it is, of course, functioning and not ratcheting right back out where it was at.
Yeah, and with 5 of that trend, 5 of them, you've covered more than half of their violations.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the score looks a lot better
It looks
immediately.
a heck of a lot better. So we're talking about getting on top of these. So now this third company that I printed up, I just wanted 3 quick examples, Keith. So I printed up this third one. They've got a few more inspections. They have out of total of 7 actual vehicle inspections, they have 22 violations. So 7 inspections, 22. So this is one of those companies, a little bit more known for getting pulled over and just having a variety of inspections. This particular company is one of those companies that's got a bunch of trucks out sitting in the dirt lot. They're fixing them in the dirt. They don't really have a shop, but they're doing what they can. But they could do a little bit more, right? So just at a glance, I just kind of went down with this one and dissected it and said, okay, let's see if we can identify trends. And just right off the bat, 2 of them popped out. So the first trend that I came across was vehicle lighting. So as we know, as you walk around that truck, bunch of different lights that are required to be on there and are required to work. So we had 6 violations for lights. So we do have that trend. Lights can also be an out of service violation. Of course, if it's like both your brake lights or your rear facing turn signals, those are of course out of service. You have to get those fixed before you're allowed to drive down the road. So, and then the second trend was, again, we're back dealing with brakes, and that was going to be both brakes out of adjustment. That was brake tubing damage, unsecure, that type of thing. We also had ABS malfunctions, some things like that. We had one of them was a brake malfunction where it looks like we had smoke or fire emitting from a wheel. So that's not good. Got a brake probably dragging, so somebody may have adjusted it or whichever, but your linings are dragging on the drum while you're driving down the road, and that's heating up that brake. I guess it could have been something that came down the pass and we had a heated up brake, but I know this particular company and they're not really up in the passes, that type of thing, so I'm assuming that it's more of a brake dragging. And then we also had a brake out of adjustment, more than 20% brake, so out of service. But again, 6 and 6, so we've got 2 trends on this particular company, both for brakes. So, we already talked about some things that you can do for your brake training, and to get them. For instance, on this particular company, I was out in this dirt lot, I was trying to help their technician, and we were just talking about the brake adjustment thing, and I was trying to explain to him, you have to replace these worn and defective components, and he just couldn't seem to grasp that, and I was talking about the rollers, the bushings, the cams, and he didn't know, and I said, well, when's the last time you changed your S-cam? And the you know what an S-cam is, right? Mm-hmm. So it rotates, yes, and it kind of pushes the brake linings up against the drum. And this young man literally looked at me and says, "What's an S-cam?" So I got a piece of paper and I kind of drew it and I explained it to him.
Oh boy!
And he says, "Oh, I've never changed those." And I was like, well, that's one of your components. Like,
time to learn.
And I talk to a lot, and everybody's got a different philosophy, but most people tell me they're going to replace their S-cam anytime they do a full-blown brake repair.
Correct.
Just that's a wear component. It wears out. Metal comes off of it, and it gets thinner, and it changes the way that brake adjusts. When you get that wear, that slack adjuster doesn't account for wearing the brake, which is why it pushes out to that greater distance. So in a way, you're aging your brakes by where that push is. Is that slack adjuster maintaining about 1 inch, or is it kind of more about that 1.5 inch to 2 inch mark? So that's going to be about the limit. If it's a type 30, it can only go out to 2 inches. So anytime you're in that 1/2 inch, your brain should be saying, hey, we need to be doing a brake service on here because those slack adjusters are running. Now they're resetting to 1.5 inches. That's telling me we're rapidly approaching our foul line. So that's the training, that you want to get and you want to look at. But unfortunately, what we see going on is back to brake adjustments. But we also have the other with the lighting. And Keith, when I pointed this out to you, you made an observation that just said straight up, couldn't the driver have eliminated this by doing a pre-trip? Yeah, you would think, right? That's the part of it. And in fact, one of the things that I also use this sheet for is when I print this list out at a training, I will typically hand these to the drivers and I'll ask them, hey, what I want you to do is go down through every one of these violations and I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S-cam. And I want you to put a check mark on every one of them that you have not changed your S- that should have been detected during a pre-trip inspection. And it usually typically comes out to be about 90% of all the violations. So yes, but you run into, of course, drivers need to do good pre-trips. They need to do that training. Like, how do they do it? What are they looking for? And we have to remind them, because drivers have human complacency and are going to get a little lost on it. But you also need to train your techs to of course, fix these, because a lot of the complaints from drivers is, well, I report it, but the techs aren't fixing it, and vice versa. The techs are saying, well, the drivers don't do a pre-trip, so we didn't even know about this. So again, this part always kind of falls to, what is your PM program, to basically what's going on daily with the pre-trips, and are we talking? And nobody likes the DVIR process because it's difficult to keep up with, but overall, the whole system is designed to work if you're following the process.
Well,
so
with these two trends, more than half again.
Yeah.
They're taken care of, and you're down to 10.
Yeah, it is. It is exactly right. So one of those situations, again, look at your trends, figure out your topics that you're going to train on, train often, and train focused. Like, your training should be designed best to help get your DOT program going where it's at. And you've got the tools right there through the safety measurement system, so you can see instantly, look, these are the problems we're having. This is what we need to focus on, and that type of thing. So looking at this company, I would really be focusing on that pre-trip, post-trip, not just for the drivers, but also for the techs and possibly the managers, to get everybody on board to make sure that we're accomplishing this goal of safety and that type of thing. So, yeah, and when I say train often, I mean at a bare minimum, you should be doing some type of driver training, at least at a minimum once a quarter. 4 times a year, you should be doing some training. Train more often if you're having some problems or need to get on top of something. And don't just assume, hey, we trained them on something once, we're good to go. Sometimes you gotta beat it into their head. You've heard the old phrase, Keith, you can lead a horse to water.
Mm-hmm.
How does that go again?
But you can't make them drink.
Yeah, but you can for damn sure hold his head underwater and he'll take some in. So
Yeah.
I think I might have heard that from you one time or another.
Maybe.
Maybe. It stuck with me, whoever I heard that from. But yeah, it's so true. So true. You just gotta stay with it with these drivers and these technicians, but you got to make sure your program is right too. So I'd use these trends to figure out where you're at. And with that, Keith, that's just my example of what we're going to do to try to pick some good training topics. So, yeah.
Yep.
So, perfect. Well, everybody, hey, thanks for tuning into the Truck Around and Find Out podcast, and we hope to catch you on one of the next episodes. Stay safe and keep our shiny side up out there.
Thank you, guys. God bless you.
Thank you.